Good afternoon and welcome to this session by IMAGINiT. Today we're going to be talking about existing CAD details. So all of our AutoCAD details that we currently have in our standards on our server that we use in our AutoCAD projects today. We're going to talk about how we can utilize those inside of Revit. My name is Tom Tobin. I'm one of the applications experts at IMAGINiT. I've been working in industry for several years as a CAD manager and a BIM manager. I've been on several different platforms and have spoke on this topic before at Autodesk University. So as I mentioned, what we're going to be talking about today is working with our existing CAD details. So one of the first things I want to tell you is that this is going to be a beginner's class. This is basically for people who are transitioning, starting their path from going from any CAD platform really, but going from AutoCAD, especially AutoCAD architecture, into Revit. So this is for beginners as they travel down this road in how to leverage their existing CAD details and how to start creating a library. So in this we're going to learn how to use our CAD details. We're going to go over drafting views again and how those work and how we're going to use that. If you're not already familiar with how to import and link, we're going to talk about that, and how to Revitize our CAD files so that we can use them inside of Revit and start to build our library. Then we'll kind of sum everything up. So once again, existing CAD details, they're still good. Okay, it's all about the details, AutoCAD to Revit. So it's all about our details. So if you've been in any of my talks or classes before, I'm actually the last of 7. I have 3 older brothers, 3 older sisters, and you had to have a great positive mental attitude to survive in a large family. My father was a very big proponent on the man who thinks he can. So PMA was very, very big in our household, but I actually find that it works in just about everything we do, especially when we're transitioning from one CAD platform to another. If you go through kicking and screaming, you're going to have a much harder time in doing this. So if you've got a good attitude, that attitude will spread and you'll find that everybody else has a good attitude about it as well. So PMA, a positive mental attitude, is vital whenever we are making a change. So we've got our CAD details, right? What to do with these details. You know, we're at the crossroads. We've started our transition into Revit, and we're finding that we have this existing library of details. We've developed it over the years. You know, what do I do with it? How do I create or use these inside of the Revit environment? I mean, does this CAD detail that I currently have still have any significance for me? I mean, what do I do with it? Do I just trash it? Do we just get rid of it? Well, yeah, sure. I mean, not yet. Okay, because right now it still has a lot of value. We can still use it, not only in your legacy products that you're still doing in AutoCAD itself, but we can leverage those into our Revit environment while we are moving forward. Now keep in mind that utilizing these CAD details inside of Revit is really supposed to be a short-term solution. It's more of a stopgap to help us kind of get over the hump while we are developing our new details in Revit. Because you know they're still good, right? Because it's a short-term solution. Now, as I mentioned before, what we're talking about is our 2D details, right? So we're going to be talking about the drafting views that we would create inside of Revit. We're not talking about detail views. Detail views are views that are created from the 3D model. That's really a different class. That's a different process. We're talking about the 2D information that's drawn with lines, circles, arcs, detailed components, just text, okay? So let's keep that in mind, that the approaches that we're talking about here are just the 2D aspects of this. So, you know, our industry is evolving. It's always evolving. Change is always happening within our industry. Even if we're just staying on the CAD platform, you know, in AutoCAD or MicroStation, whatever it is that you may be using, it's continuing to evolve as well, always coming up with new features and whatnot. But when we are transitioning to a completely different platform, as the technology is evolving and now we can build these buildings virtually, the first step towards change is the awareness of this. And you guys are all familiar with this, whether you've gone into it kicking and screaming because the customer is demanding that you use Revit, whatever the reason may be why you're going there, the second step towards making this transition is acceptance of it. And that goes right back to what I talked about in my very first slide about PMA, a positive mental attitude. So we need to accept that these things are actually going to happen, right? So what do we do? How do we transition these CAD details properly? Well, there's three major approaches in how to work with our standard typical details within Revit. The first one, of course, is to redraw them in Revit. To just start by opening up, creating what we would call a container project or a detail Revit project where nothing but your 2D details live. So this would be a container, a library of sorts that we can maintain and use for all our projects, similar to whatever DWGs that you're containing right now with all your details in them. So that would be redrawn, but you know, that's really a perfect world, right? I mean, of course we all have time. We don't have deadlines. We don't have fires that are happening that we've got to get out the door late for a meeting. We've got all kinds of time to spend redrawing all of our CAD details, right? Of course we do. No, we don't. So, you know, one of the solutions to this is, you know, the word intern. We can get an intern to start redrawing them. I will say that redrawing something in Revit is a great learning tool in how to use Revit, because you don't have to think about, you know, the design or whatnot. You're just sort of pushing this back out. But the reality is that we don't always have time to do this, especially when it already exists inside AutoCAD, right? We've already got the detail. So let's leverage that. Let's import or link it. It's an XREF. We're basically treating this as an XREF, just like how you've done it in your AutoCAD workflow. You've probably taken that detail and copied it into your project directory, because if it needs to be changed a little bit, tweaked for whatever your application may be, you didn't want to do that to the one in the master library. You want to tweak it for your project specifically, and then you XREF it in. So we would do the same thing. We would take that detail, that DWG, we would bring it into our project directory. Now I'll mention this again a little later, but the big caveat for doing this inside of Revit is that each detail has to be in its own DWG for this to work properly. Now you can bring them all in, but then we're going to lose some functionality that we could get in Revit. So if we want to leverage the detail itself from CAD, and we want to leverage some of the things that Revit does well, like tagging, annotation, coordinating, the views on sheets and whatnot, Each detail has to be in its own DWG. And also remember, this is supposed to be a short-term solution. This isn't supposed to be our workflow from this point forward. This is just as we're creating and building our library. The third methodology is to Revitize the detail. We need to have more Revitization as we're going through. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other terms that I could put the word Revit in front of, but basically what we're talking about is taking the detail, and inside of here, in the idea of Revitizing the CAD detail, there's kind of two processes. It's not quite the perfect world, but it's close. And these two processes is that you bring it into, let's say, a drafting view, and we trace over it, just like you would if you created a design in AutoCAD, and then you bring it into Revit, and then you recreate the floor plan by using your pick line tool. Okay, we'll take a look at that. The other one is that we take that and we drop the detail down to its base elements, and then what we do is that we change these items, these AutoCAD items, these CAD elements into Revit elements. So it's close to perfect world because we are creating a Revit detail, but we're not drawing it from scratch. And depending on the size of the detail, this can go very quickly, or it could take a little while. So let's take a look at some of these methodologies. Now, we're not going to look at number one at all because that's pretty self-explanatory. You're just going to open your project up, you're going to create a drafting view, and you're just going to start creating the detail. Okay, that's what number one is. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at 2 and 3. So we're going to start with how do we link this CAD detail into our Revit project. So here is my typical Revit. Oops, went too far there. So here is my Revit project, and inside here really what I want to create is a typical control joint for a floor. Here it is in AutoCAD. I already have it. So in AutoCAD, what I've done is I've taken it and I've turned it into just one detail in this DWG. I've sort of cleaned things up the best I could, maybe gotten rid of layers and all that other stuff so that I don't have a lot of excess information in here. I've just simply got this detail. So now that I know what the detail is, I've kind of done a little tweaking inside of AutoCAD. I'm going to come back to my project, and I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to create a drafting view. Okay, something that we should have learned in our training while we were transitioning. I'm going to give it the name inside of Revit. I can always change this name later, but I'm going to call it what it is, a typical floor control joint. Now what's important is that because I'm just linking this in, it needs to be the same scale as the detail I'm bringing in so that it prints out properly. So I'm going to make sure that the scale matches the AutoCAD detail that I'm bringing in. Now if this was truly just a full-fledged Revit detail, I can change this later and it doesn't matter. But I'm going to say OK, and it just simply creates my blank piece of paper to impose my design on, right? So instead of drawing something new, I can bring this in. If I look over at my project browser under details, I can see that it created my typical floor control joint. All right, so now I'm going to go up to my Insert tab, and I'm going to look at my methods for bringing in a CAD file. There's actually two. There's a link a CAD file and there's import a CAD file. To import the CAD file means that it is part of my project, and it's just sort of like a block detail. I really can't do too much with it, and I can't necessarily make changes to it. So if I link it, then I can make changes in AutoCAD and update that link. so that it works just like an XREF. Okay, so that's really the preferred method for doing this. There is going to be an option for why will import this, but right now let's just go ahead and let's link this CAD detail into our project. So I'm going to pick link, and it pulls up this interface. Now this interface is the same whether I link or import. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that I'm in my standards folder where I've got my DWGs. You'd actually have this in your project folder. I'm going to pick the detail that I want to bring in, the DWG that I want to use. And I can bring in other types, file types. DWG does work best. I can bring in a DXF or a DGN SAT file, or even a SketchUp file. You want to make sure that you're using the most current versions of SketchUp to bring into the most current versions of Revit. Also, for my MicroStation friends, DGN, I worked in MicroStation, you can bring them in natively, but they don't really work as well. They tend to slow down your system a little bit. So do yourself a favor, and in MicroStation you can just do save as a DWG. You're going to really appreciate that down the road. So bring it in as a DWG. We have some other options here, so we can talk about the colors. We can invert it, preserve it, or turn it to black and white so it looks just like a Revit detail inside. Color means nothing for printing out of Revit. I like to leave it either inverted or preserve the colors, just so that visually I can immediately see what I've brought in from my CAD format, from my CAD application into Revit. Okay, then you can bring in layers and levels. It includes levels because that's what layers are called in MicroStation. You can bring them all in. You can bring in what's visible, or you can specify. If you specify, you'll get a dialog once you hit the open button, and then you can pick the levels or layers that you want to bring in. I like to bring in what's visible. This is also why I like to do a little work ahead of time and just get rid of everything else in case I don't pick this option. I bring them all in. I'm not bringing in a whole bunch of empty ones that I don't need. It's going to auto detect the units for me. I can change that, but auto detect is good. I have different positioning methods. Typically I'm just bringing this into a sheet, into my drafting view. So origin to origin is fine. It's going to be the current view, so some things are grayed out here because once again I'm just bringing it into current view. The other reason why we want to pare this down to just the detail is that inside a drafting view, as opposed to bringing it into like a plan view, I can't clip here. So this is another reason why I want to have just the detail and the detail only. So here it is. Okay, if I'm maintaining some good standards in my office, not using shape files anymore in AutoCAD and using true type fonts just like Revit does, these should look fairly similar. Okay, at least font wise and whatnot. If they don't, we can do some setups. We can make some changes here to make this appear a little better so that lines look good or whatnot. So I can open up my visual graphics, so I can type in VG or VV, go to the shortcut, and then go to my imported categories tab. If you're not familiar with this shows where all of our DWGs are actually in this project, and I can expand the node, and then I actually get the layer list. Once again, another reason why I only want to bring in what I see. At this point I can pick several of these layers all at once, and I can override their display. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a few of these, and I'm not going to change its color because once again I just wanted to see the color so I know what is coming from my CAD formats. I'm just going to change the weight because color once again means nothing inside of Revit, but the pen weights that I'm assigning, that does mean something. So I'm going to go ahead and pick some of these line weights, change them a little bit, And we can set up something so that this does this for us when we come in, or we can do this to a bunch of them all at once. And so I've pretty much got this looking the way that I want to see it, and I'm going to say okay. Now if I zoom in, you can see that I've got some line weights happening here. So this is going to print out a little bit more like how I expect it to print out. So what's the next step? I've got it in here, right? I've created the drafting view. If I go to my project browser and double click, I can see that it's there. Let's go ahead and add a little intelligence to it. And what I mean by that, let's make it so that it tags and coordinates properly. This is one of the things that Revit does really well. So what I'm going to do is you're going to see that in my 3D view I actually drew a model line that shows up in both my 3D view, actually in all my views and on my plan view, and this is representing the line for my control joint. I didn't actually model it by making a true reveal in there. What I did was I just put a line in, and I'm going to say, hey, let's add a section marker. This is going to represent my control joint in here, and I'm going to go over to my type selector and make sure that I pick the type that I want to create, and I'm going to go ahead and put my section marker in here. Now for those of you watching, you may have already guessed that this isn't necessarily going to give me the result that I want. If I double click on this, it's actually going to take it to the model. So this would be a view from the model. That's not what I want. I want this to come from my drafting view. I said that detailing from a model view was a different class. So let's delete that, okay? Because this is a drafting view, let's start this again. And this time, before I even place anything on my view in my sheet, I'm going to go up to the ribbon, and for those of you who aren't familiar with this, you select reference another view. So reference a view you've already created. Okay, you hit the drop down arrow, and because I'm creating this as a detail view, a detail view, it's only going to show me the detail / drafting views that I am creating or have created in my project. Now this list can get pretty long, right? So there is a search, and I can start typing in typical floor, and it's going to start finding that for me immediately. I don't have to get the whole thing in. Now I've dialed in the view that I want it to use. Now I can go down to my floor plan view and insert this section marker. I double click on the head like you would anything else, and it goes directly to that drafting view. So now I've associated the view with the marker, with the tag. Now if I drag that view out of my project browser and put it on a sheet, Revit's going to coordinate it for me. It's going to fill in the tags that I need to have filled in. I'm going to change the detail number to A for this example. Now I might not really put this on this sheet, but you understand what I'm doing here. So here is the tag. It's got the A101A on it, and if I were to remove this detail, then the marker would become blank, and I put it on a different sheet, it would then coordinate with the proper sheet number. So we can see that now I've leveraged my existing CAD library. I've linked this in. Like I said, it has to be a single DWG with a single CAD detail in it. I've now associated it inside of Revit so that I have some Revit intelligence that go along with it. So this is kind of the stopgap. I can use the information that I have. I may have to do a little bit of work in AutoCAD. In other words, when I copy that DWG file over, if there's more than one detail in there, turn it to just the one I want. So I may have to create several DWGs if I have multiple details that I want to bring in. But I can do that. That doesn't take much to do. Bring it in and leverage it. So the next step is, how do we take that exact same detail and we Revitize it, right? So let's look at how we would Revitize this same detail. We'll use the exact same example. So what we want to do is that whenever we Revitize a CAD detail, we never want to do it in our current project. We want to open up a temp project, a brand new temp project. So I'm going to go to File, New Project, and I'm going to use my company's template, and I'm just going to create a temp project here. I'm not going to keep this project. I'm not going to save it. This is simply going to be for Revitizing this detail. So once I'm in my new project, my temp project, I'm going to do the same steps initially that I did when I linked it in. I'm going to go to View. I'm going to create my drafting view. I'm going to give it the name, typical floor control joint. Once again, I can change this name later. And scale, because when I'm done, it doesn't really matter either. But for consistency's sake, I'm going to keep it at 3/4. But I can change the scale because it'll be a full functioning Revit detail when I'm done. But here's my drafting view in my new project. So you can see that it shows up in my project browser just like before. Everything looks really good here. So I am ready to start working with this. But before I do that, I just want you to see here, I'm going to go into my Manage tab, Additional Settings, look at my line patterns, and you can see that I have nothing unusual in here. So sometimes when you bring things in from AutoCAD, I'm going to do the same thing with my text. You can see that I have all Revit text in here. When you import from AutoCAD, you start to get extra stuff you don't want inside your project. Okay, in this case, we're going to import it because we're going to drop this later, and I can't do that if I link it. So you can see that the interface is exactly the same. So it remembered my last use of this, and I'm just going to bring it in. It brings it in really fast. So at this point, I talked about the two methods for Revitizing. One method is to just go to my Annotation tab, pick my detail lines, pick the line style that I want to use, and in my Draw panel, I'll just use like Pick Lines, and I'll just start picking the lines and tracing over this. So depending on the size of the detail, this could be a really good way to create a Revit detail. In this case, this might have been really good because this isn't a very large detail. But what we're really going to talk about is how to change these AutoCAD objects into Revit. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this link again, this import. And whenever you link or import, it typically brings it in pinned. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unpin it so that I can manipulate it. And we're going to see that up in my ribbon now, I have that wonderful tool that all AutoCAD users love, and that tool is Explode. So I'm going to use the Explode tool, and I'm going to do a full explode on this. So Revit's then going to talk to me. In this particular view, it won't do the filled region because it's not a closed shape, and it's going to say, I'm going to delete this filled region. And I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead, delete it. As a matter of fact, let's just delete that whole upper detail, because for time constraints, let's just Revitize this one. It's the same process for both of them. But I'm just going to start here so that we can kind of get this done. So I'm going to select my text. And actually, let's go up to the Annotation tab. Now, this is what I was showing you before. Before I imported this, I didn't have any of these extra styles. I have the name of the DWG in it. Okay, now I have this inside the project. I wouldn't want this inside of my active project. So I'm going to go ahead and select this text, and I'm going to say select all instances. Now when we're doing this, sometimes we can use this tool, other times it won't let us. So I'm going to dial in my Revit font. my Revit text style. I may have to do a little adjustments here, and this had some hard returns in AutoCAD, so I'm just kind of getting rid of those so that this will rubber band the way that I want it to rubber band, so I can make some adjustments here if I want to in how this is viewed. And then what I can do is I can come in, I can select that text, and I can add my leaders. So I can add leaders to this. In this case, I didn't select the curved ones. I could have, but I decided to pick the ones that just are straight lines with an elbow. And so at that point, I can come in and I can delete those splines and arrowheads that came from AutoCAD. So there's a little cleanup that has to happen here as I'm changing these objects. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these dimensions because when I exploded, they just turned into basic line and font. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to add some Revit dimensions. So I'll just dimension this up. Once again, this is a pretty simple detail, but you can see that this process goes fairly quickly. So depending on the complexity, it may take a little bit more time. So let's finish with the text. So I'm going to take the text, and you can make this as simple or as complex as you want. So I want different text sizes here, so I'm doing these individually. If I want this to be underlined, of course, I can go into my edit mode for that text, and I can do that. Or I could have created a style that was underlined and just did it at one time. So my next step here would be that I've got all my dimensions and all my fonts taken care of. Now I have to take care of the line work that is in here too. So what I'm going to do is that I brought in these break lines that came from AutoCAD. I want Revit break lines, so I'm going to go ahead and place my family that has these break lines in it. So I'm going to place that in here and then make some adjustments so that it starts to look the way I want it to look. Make sure I grab the grips as I do this. Let's just sort of place this where I want. I'm going to adjust the lengths of these grips. Now the nice thing about using my Revit one is that it's got a wipeout field in it, and I can adjust and get those to look kind of how I want. I'm going to go ahead and take that one and flip it over to the other side, and I will put these in their proper place a little bit better as we go through here to make sure that I got them where I want. If I could actually click on the mirror command, we could get this going. Okay, so I've just temporarily placed these in here. I'll adjust them, but I've done that so that I can position myself to use them and get rid of the AutoCAD line work here shortly. So that looks good. I've got the wipeouts where I want. So the next thing that I want to work on here, I'm just going to do a full window around it, and you can see that all my lines, they are AutoCAD lines because they actually have the layer name from AutoCAD associated with it. So these are the ones that I want to change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pick the items that I want to have change, and it looks like I actually didn't just get lines there, so let me do that again. I think I had the detail item picked as well, so let's make sure I don't have that this time. So I'm going to pick all my heavy and wide lines, and I'm just going to make them the wide line here in Revit. And so there I've made all of those wide lines. If I do this again, we can see that now I only have one layer left that I haven't changed. So let's go ahead and just make that one my thin lines in this case. So I've got all this line work pretty much taken care of. So what I have now is my filled region. So let's change that to my Revit filled region. As you can see, it's got the DWG name, so I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this because it's sort of fitting this boundary around that AutoCAD detail item for the brake line. So I'm just going to create a rectangle in here with invisible lines, and I'm going to get rid of the old boundary. Now I could have edited this and not done it this way. I just thought this was a little quicker. So I'm going to finish it, and then I'm just going to adjust. I can just pull these out because I'm going to have those wipeout fields, so it doesn't really matter how far I take this. And let's just pop it here and up to the top. And if I want to go ahead and get around the actual control joint itself, I will go ahead and edit my boundary one more time. I'll use my split tool, delete the inner segment, and now I've got this done. Okay, it's starting to look really good. I still need to get rid of those detail items that came from AutoCAD. I don't want those. And now I can adjust my my Revit break lines so that it looks appropriate the way that I want it to look. Let's adjust the other side as well. So I said it's got the wipeout field, so anything that goes through that. Now this is looking pretty good, but if you notice, I did miss one more thing. So if I do my crossing windows, do my filter, I see, you know what, I actually did miss another line group in here. Okay, I was zoomed in a little tight. This is kind of how I do my checks. I use the filter, I window everything in, and I can see what I've missed or not. So I'm just going to change this to basic lines. Now this looks really good. I've got this all set and ready to go. I do another check. Looks good. If I want to check what the detail items are, yep, that actually looks good. It's the fill pattern and the two break lines. So everything here looks good. So how do I get this into my current project now? I've already washed it through this temporary project. So all I really have to do is go over to my project browser at this point. And when I go over to my project browser, all I need to do is right click on the detail, on the drafting view itself, and copy it to the clipboard. Once I've done that, I just simply activate my current project, the project where I want this, and I can do a Control V, or I can go to my Modify tab and I can just hit paste. Revit's going to tell me it's going to bring in some additional items, which is fine, and there it is. Okay, it's right here. It looks good. If I want to look in my project browser under details, I'm going to go down, and there it is. So it's all set for me to use. I like to double check by putting a window around it and just making sure that everything looks the way I want it to look, that there's no AutoCAD information inside here. At that point, I can actually close and delete that temporary project. I don't need it anymore, and there's no need to save it because I've brought the detail inside here. So if I go ahead and I look in my manage, and this is why I did it through that temporary project, I can see that it did not bring in any of those imported line types. And if I were to look in my text, I did not get any of those odd text files. These are the ones that are in this project already. So I didn't bring in or corrupt my drawing, this current project, in any way. It is now set and ready for me to do the call out, just like I showed you in the previous part where we imported and linked the CAD file. I would simply go in to my quick access toolbar, pick my section detail mark, go to my plan view. Before I place it, I go up to my ribbon, tell it to reference an existing view, which would be this same view, and everything else would be the exact same as we did before. So that's how you Revitize a CAD detail. So you just put that together, and that's how it all functions when you go through that process. So as you're going through that process, I mentioned in the very beginning, in the perfect world scenario, we would draw this from scratch. And ideally, we would create this inside of a Revit project that is nothing but details. Okay, so once we've Revitized these, we can copy them into this container file, which is our standard details file, which is going to live out on a server. So let's take a look at that, right? So once we start building this project, so here's my project again. Okay, we'll use this same project, but what we've got here is using that container file. So as time has gone on, I have created a container file that is on my server that looks like this. Okay, so I have put all my 2D details in here that are my standard details, and in this case I've actually even placed them on a sheet ahead of time. If we look at my project browser, I have them all coordinated. So here's the individual details. These are all drafting views. Okay, so we can start looking through the different ones. These are all my door details, millwork, everything that you would do within your project. In this case, I also in this container file have put other information, not just my 2D details as well. As you're seeing as I'm going through here, now I'm looking at wall details and wall section details and things like that. I've also included things like schedules can be in here. So you can include all your schedules and you can bring them in the same way. You can even create some of your legends in here, although your legends should be in your template file. But if I go down and I start looking at my different sheets that I have created, this is my typical door sheet, and I have other sheets here that I've already laid out. This one isn't as full, but some typical restrooms, some typical signage sheets. So you can bring these in when you want to do your project. So you don't have to have these in your template. You have them in this container file, and as you're Revitizing or creating new ones, you're populating this. And so it's a good idea to have somebody sort of maintain this. So let's go back to our project here. So here's our project. Now before, I opened a temporary project and I did the Revitization, and then I had to right click, copy it to the clipboard, and that's a onesie sort of type process. Here I can go to my Insert tab, go to Insert from File, go to my standard library. So wherever my standards live on my server, I can go there. So here's some standards, standard details, and I'm going to pick that DWG or that DWG, that Revit project, and it's going to open up another dialog inside my current project. Okay, and this kind of looks like a print dialog that we can get when we're trying to set up what we want to print when we're doing views. So I have the ability to show everything that's in here. I can show just the drafting views that are in here. I can look at just the sheets that have been put together, or I can look at just the schedules that I have put in here that I want to bring in as well. The nice thing about this is that I'm going to hit check done so that I make sure that I don't have anything checked, because whatever I check is what comes into my project. But what's nice is that I can start selecting these, and it's going to give me a preview and go, yep, I like that, that's what I want. Let's go ahead and let's come down here to some door detail. Yeah, I want that one, I want that one. Whereas doing the Control V or copying to the clipboard is a one at a time process. I can pick multiples here. So anything that I have checked, all of these will come in at the same time. Of course, the more I check, the more complicated the detail, the longer it'll take for it to come in, but it'll still I can do this pretty quickly. So if I have a standard sheet setter set up, of course I can go ahead and start looking at the way these sheets look with my schedules and whatnot. So I'm going to come down here to like my door details, and so here's the whole sheet. If I were to pick any of these, it's going to bring in the sheet and all the drafting views, and it's going to be organized in the same manner as this container file is organized. So for argument's sake, let's just go ahead and let's pick one of these sheets here to bring in. I'm going to pick the ceiling details. There's only like 3 details on here, so I'm just going to check that, and then I'm going to say OK. So here's my detail. I'm going to hit OK, and as soon as I do that, it's going to process. Revit's going to tell me that, hey, it may duplicate some types. That's okay. Thank you for letting me know. Might give me a little more information, but there's the sheet. It's inside my project. If I look here, in this case, how I had it organized in my container file was drafting views were organized under 08, and here are the 3 drafting views. I can change that later if I want inside of my current project. This would be something that you would want to have your container file matching the same standard naming convention that you have in your current project. So I switched back to that container file so you could see where that was at, and I could move this and reorganize it into that detail folder if I wanted to. If I come down and look at my sheets, we're going to see that it created a sheet with the exact same name also I had in that container file, which starts with a C, so they're in alphabetical order. So there it is, and I can of course change the number and title of this sheet. It came in with the same title block that I had in that container file, so if I'm doing a project with a different type of title block, I can of course just select that and dial it in, and it will then immediately match the format that I'm using here. So a quick way to bring in sheets. So container files are really useful in what we're doing here. So as you are building this library, okay, as you are either doing them from scratch, Revitizing them from your CAD files, you want to build a standard project that contains all this. As I mentioned before, somebody pretty much needs to manage this information, to be in charge of making sure this happens, keeping it updated, just like how you would do that in your AutoCAD environment. Now, I always kind of liked this quote. This is just another one of those quotes for our evolving industry. Any change, even a change for the better, is always accompanied by drawbacks and discomforts. So as you are transitioning into Revit from CAD, I guarantee you might not see it in the initial steps, but I guarantee you that this change will be for the better as you start to move forward. It's going to have a few discomforts, like, hey, how do I deal with my detail library? So the short-term answer to that is use them, right? They're still good. Go ahead and link them in, leverage what you have. The drawback is that they're going to have to be created at some point, or recreated at some point inside of your Revit environment. So the more that you can do recreating these things, or creating them from scratch, or building a new library as your projects move forward, the better this is going to be. So I always like to end with positive mental attitude. Remember, you can still get all the benefits out of your old CAD details, whether that's linking them or using them as the template to Revitize and create your new ones. When we're working here, the goal eventually is to have 100% clean Revit details, intelligent Revit Details if possible, which means using the Detail Component Manager inside of Revit to do that. So we can create all these objects so they can be tagged in a certain way. That is not just lines, circles, and arcs, but that everything works the way that we want them to work. I mean, I'm going to keep mentioning this and sort of hammering this home. The right attitude is everything. Keep an open mind. Just take one step at a time. You'll be surprised how fast down the road you're going to go. I know that right now seems like it's been taking forever. Seems like you can be much more productive if you just stay inside of AutoCAD. That's the comfort zone. That's what you know. The more and more you work in Revit, the more and more you're going to see the advantages that the software can give you that you can't get in that fragmented 2D drafting environment. Okay? So keep a good positive mental attitude. Do this on a case-by-case basis. Before you know it, you'll have a whole library completely set up with all the information that you're looking for. You'll have that detail library created in no time. Once again, that wonderful word, intern, if you can do that. So I want to thank you for attending this session. If you need additional information, please don't be afraid to reach out to us at IMAGINiT, to reach out to me at IMAGINiT. And that's all, folks. Thank you very, very much.